Welcome. This is the voice of Oculvra. We invite you with us on this journey to another world. So please, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and relax. I used to joke that I learned to read from footnotes. My earliest memories were of my father, hunched over a battered wooden desk, the kind with uneven legs and ink stains soaked so deep they looked like bruises. The desk always smelled faintly of dust and old paper. He never went to university, never had credentials, but he devoured books the way other people devoured food, occult manuscripts, half-translated folklore, banned histories, margins filled with frantic handwriting. He believed the past was alive, that stories didn't end just because people stopped telling them. That belief became mine. I studied history because I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Undergraduate, master's, doctorate, Romanian medieval studies, with a specialization in Wallachian folklore and the political myth-making surrounding Vlad III. My colleagues liked to frame history as distance, dates, deaths, diagrams. I framed it as proximity. The past wasn't gone. It was breathing quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. That philosophy led me to Bran Castle. I worked as a tour guide for the current owners, a respectable arrangement that paid modestly but allowed me to speak freely. Mostly. I loved watching tourists arrive with plastic fangs and Dracula jokes, only to leave unsettled, quieter, carrying something heavier than they expected. I told them myths were easier than truth, and truth was often more disturbing. At night, after the castle closed, I often stayed behind, walking the corridors alone and taking in the castle's energy and living in fantasy. The stone remembered things. I swear it did. Temperature shifts, echoes where none should be. A sensation like being watched, not threatening, just aware. In recent months, my fantasy castle adventures have increased. This personal escape of mine is the only way I can cope with my father's cancer diagnosis. Like I said, doing tours pays modestly, and funding cancer treatment requires more than a modest earning. Money was the one thing imagination couldn't fix. My father's cancer diagnosis came quietly, but ruthlessly. Aggressive pancreatic cancer, 2 months tops. The doctors said, likely less. There was an experimental treatment, unapproved, expensive, promising in that dangerous way hope often is. So I gave more tours, private tours, late tours. I smiled until my jaw ached, and spoke until my voice cracked, revealing the desperation leaching onto my passionate lectures like a virus. And I had no idea that the castle had been listening all along. Want is a dangerous word when time is short. I wanted my father to live, not in the abstract, philosophical sense, but physically, complaining about the coffee, arguing with me about whether a footnote belonged on page 312 or 313. I wanted him alive long enough to be angry about something trivial again. I woke before dawn and fell asleep after midnight. I added extra tours whenever the castle administrators allowed it, sometimes stacking 10 in a single day. I offered private historical walks. No Dracula gimmicks, no capes, just the truth. For tourists who wanted something authentic. Wealthy couples, graduate students, the occasional eccentric who asked questions that lingered a little too long on blood rituals or burial practices. I said yes to all of it. Between tours, I wrote articles no one asked for, essays pitched to journals that paid in prestige rather than money. I applied for grants, with deadlines that mocked me by existing months from now. I sent emails to universities across Europe offering guest lectures, adjunct work, anything that could be done remotely, quickly. Nothing moved fast enough. At night I sat with my father in the small apartment I grew up in, listening to the rasp of his breathing and the soft hum of machines. He apologized constantly. I should have saved more. He whispered once, eyes fixed on the ceiling, "You saved everything that mattered." I said, and meant it. Still I needed money, real money, soon. The castle has always been my second home, but nowadays it's practically my only home. I knew its rhythms better than my own. When the floors creaked, where drafts formed, which stairwells stayed unnaturally warm even in winter. I started volunteering for obscure archival work just to stay longer, to be useful, to avoid thinking about the clock ticking inside my father. I told myself that history rewarded persistence, that knowledge always opened doors. But late one evening, while counting the day's tips in the staff room, I realized something that made my stomach drop. Even if I worked non-stop, every tour filled, every donation generous, I would still fall short. The number didn't lie. I stared at it until the digits blurred, until they looked like dates etched into a tombstone. So I did something I hadn't done since I was a teenager, listening to my father ramble about forbidden manuscripts and unrecorded chambers. I started hoping for something unreasonable, not miracles, just something. Something valuable enough to change the equation. Because my father didn't have time for patience, and I was running out of acceptable ways to save him. On ordinary afternoons, the kind I usually loved, touring with a small groups, polite but distant, I kept getting about halfway through my route when I envisioned my father, frail and shrinking, and completely untouched by how beautifully I spoke history. Words weren't enough anymore. History wasn't enough to save him. Every night now, after the castle closed, I stayed behind, wandering the halls and engaging in fantasy like I'd done countless times, touching the walls, thinking of my father's stories, his belief that history hid things on purpose, that some knowledge survived by staying buried. I used to smile at that. Now, I listened. Standing alone in the half-lit corridor near the eastern tower, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was hard to grasp, but for some reason, it was as if something was understanding me, reaching out a phantom hand for assistance. The next few days blurred together in the way only desperation can blur time. Every hour felt too expensive to waste, every minute measured against the steady ticking of my father's prognosis. I gave tours back to back, my voice growing hoarse as I recited dates and legends I'd spoken 1,000 times before. Normally I loved watching people's faces change when history stopped being abstract and became human. Lately I barely saw them. At night I slept in fragments. Dreams of stone corridors stretching farther than they should. Doors I'd never noticed before, cracked open just enough to show darkness breathing on the other side. I'd wake with my heart racing, convinced I'd heard footsteps where none should be. One morning my phone rang during breakfast. A private tour booking, 15 slots. Fully paid, cash. I stared at the confirmation email like it might dissolve if I blinked. Large groups were rare this time of year. That afternoon I stood in the courtyard, straightening my badge and rehearsing my opening lines. 15 people meant energy, noise, interruptions. I told myself to be grateful. However, as the time of the tour approached, only one person arrived. He stood just beyond the archway, tall and impossibly still, dressed in a dark overcoat that looked too heavy for the weather. His hair was black, long enough to brush his shoulders, except for a few bright white strands that caught the light in a way that felt deliberate. I checked my watch, then the booking. "You're early. Or maybe the rest of the group decided to ditch you," I said. He smiled, not wide, not friendly, just enough. "I'm punctual." His accent was difficult to place. Not Romanian, not quite foreign either. I waited another 10 minutes. No one else came. "I can reschedule," I offered, already calculating how much money I'd lose. He tilted his head. "Why would you? I paid for the experience. All 15 experiences, to be exact." Something in his eyes, dark, reflective, made my rehearsed professionalism slip. "You paid for 15 people?" He didn't even respond, just gazed at me with a blank but beautiful stare. Feeling awkward, I just said, "Okay then, no problem at all. Solo tours are always fun. Let's begin." He didn't interrupt throughout the tour, didn't take photos. He listened the way scholars do, not tourists, head slightly inclined, gaze wandering the walls as if reading something written just beneath the stone. When I spoke about Vlad, he didn't flinch at the brutality. When I mentioned myths of blood and immortality, his lips twitched, almost amused. "You tell the truth. A true, authentic woman of history," he said at one point, softly. Sort of stunned, I responded. "Yes, I love history, telling the tales of what survives." He seemed to like my answer. Then again, he was practically unreadable. As we moved deeper into the castle, I noticed something unsettling. He was subtly guiding me, pausing at intersections just long enough for me to choose the path he clearly preferred. Slowing when we approached staircases I usually hurried past. Eventually we arrived at the lower part of the castle, dark, cold, hiding secrets and stories the world has never known. And honestly, touring the lower part of the castle was always my favorite. "All right," I exclaimed. "We're about to descend into the dungeon. Many visitors skip this part or ask to leave due to feeling disturbed. So, are you feeling good enough to proceed?" He stared at me blankly, eventually saying, "Proceed." "Very well," I responded, and we made our way down the spiraling staircase. I approached the bottom of the staircase when I no longer heard his footsteps behind me. Turning around, I asked, "Sir, did you need to return back? It's okay. Many guests feel uneasy down here." "No," he responded. "I'd like to go down here instead." Confused, I walked back up a few steps and found my guest standing next to an open corridor within the staircase wall. "What on earth is this?" I said with unease. "I don't recognize this passage." He shrugged. Castles remember themselves differently than we do. That should have been my cue to stop, to return to the surface. Instead, I followed him. The air cooled as we descended down the spiraling staircase of this hidden corridor. stone steps narrower than the public staircases, dustless despite their apparent age. My pulse thudded in my ears, and every rational part of my mind screamed that this wasn't possible, that I knew Bran Castle better than anyone. "Who are you?" I asked. He glanced back at me, eyes catching the dim light. "A local." We reached a door carved directly into the rock. No handle, no plaque. Just symbols etched so faintly they seemed worn by time itself. My breath caught. "These markings," I whispered. "They're not documented." "Most important things aren't," he said. That was when fear finally found its voice. My hands trembled. This wasn't history anymore. This wasn't folklore. "This isn't part of the tour," I said, forcing firmness into my voice. "We need to go back." He studied me. "You don't have time to go back," he said gently. Before I could ask what he meant, the stone door shifted, soundless, effortless, revealing an oppressing darkness. The door opened without a sound, and that frightened me more than any grinding hinge ever could have. Stone should protest when it moves. History should resist being disturbed. This didn't. It welcomed us. The staircase beyond spiraled downward far deeper than the castle's foundations should allow. I knew the architectural surveys by heart. I had lectured on them, and yet, step after step, descended into a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. "I need to document this," I whispered, already fumbling for my phone. "These chambers don't respond well to documentation." He responded. That should have stopped me, but I pressed on. The walls began to change as we descended. The stone darkened, taking on a faint red sheen, like iron-rich earth freshly exposed. The air smelled faintly metallic, old and clean at the same time. I felt lightheaded, not from lack of oxygen, but from a strange sense of recognition, like I had dreamed of this place before. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a wide chamber. In the center of the room lay a coffin, carved from a deep crimson stone that gleamed as if polished from within. It wasn't marble. It wasn't granite. I didn't know what it was. Veins of darker color pulsed faintly through its surface, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. A symbol was carved into the lid, sharp lines intersecting in a geometry that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. It glowed softly, white light breathing in and out. "This is impossible," I said, my voice unsteady and unfamiliar. I stepped forward despite my higher self screaming not to. Every instinct screamed danger. Yet my body moved as if guided. "We need to leave," I said, louder now, panic breaking through. "We need authorities, preservation teams. This isn't safe." He watched me with something close to affection, like a person watching their pet act foolishly. "You don't sound like your father's daughter right now," he said. My blood ran cold. "You don't know my father." "I do," he replied, "although he does not know of me. Your father has always believed more than he was allowed to prove." I spun toward him, my fear partly replaced with anger. "How do you know about him?" Instead of answering, he walked to the coffin and placed one pale hand against the glowing symbol. The light intensified, the chamber humming softly, vibrating through my bones. "This is where I sleep," he said simply. The words didn't register at first. I laughed once, sharp and hysterical. You're saying this like it's normal. For me, it is. The coffin lid slid aside, responding to his touch. The interior was lined with a material that looked like dark velvet woven from shadow itself. He turned to face me fully then. "You may call me Q," he said. "My true name has been lost to time and is no longer relevant. But if you must call me something, Q will suffice." "Okay, Q," I said back. You're implying—" "Yes." He interrupted. "I am a vampire." There was no thunder, no dramatic transformation, just a statement of fact, delivered the way one might say, "I am tired." Every academic instinct in me tried to categorize, to rationalize. But none of that explained the room, the coffin, the way my pulse synced with the light. "You're not afraid," he observed. "I don't know what I am right now, Q." I practically screamed back. "You carry death with you," Q said quietly. "Not your own, someone else's." My knees weakened. "Your father is dying," he continued, gently now. 2 weeks, perhaps less. You've been counting days instead of sleeping, wandering my castle walls in search of escape and salvation. Tears blurred my vision. I hated him for knowing. I hated myself more for listening. "I can help him," Q said. He stepped into the coffin, lying down. The lid hovered above him. "Life through death is what I can offer," Q said. "Return to this chamber tomorrow night with your father, and you shall receive what no earthly currency or doctor can provide." The coffin closed. The light dimmed. Silence swallowed the chamber. I stood there shaking, surrounded by proof that shattered centuries of scholarship, belief, and my mind. That same night, I rushed to my father, his house smelling of distress and hopelessness. I didn't ease into it. I didn't know how. There are some truths that refuse soft language. "There's something, well, someone under the castle," I said. My voice shook. He watched me with the calm patience of a man who had spent his entire life being dismissed. His skin was translucent now, stretched thin over bone, but his eyes were still sharp. "You finally found them," he said quietly. That stopped me. "Found who?" "The proof," he whispered. "The thing everyone told me was a myth." I told him everything then. The man with the black hair, the hidden stairwell, the coffin that breathed like a living thing. When I told him the word vampire, he laughed once, softly, almost lovingly, and then coughed until I had to hold him upright. "All those years," he murmured, breathless. "They said I was chasing ghosts. My old friends wanted to throw me in an asylum." "You were right," I said, "about all of it." When I told him Q said he could live, truly live, my father finally looked afraid, but interested. "Not survive?" he asked. "Live? Truly live? Break free from these chains of poor health?" "Yes," I responded plainly. Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. Then he reached for my hand with surprising strength. "Take me there," he said, "before I die, believing I wasted my life." That night, the castle opened itself to us. When my father saw the coffin, he fell to his knees, not in terror, in awe. He reached out but didn't touch it, like a man standing before a god he never expected to meet. "I was never crazy," he whispered. Tears streamed down his face. Q approached and guided my father gently, explaining the situation, the cost, the permanence. My father listened like a student at last allowed into the true classroom. "You should ask your questions now," Q said calmly. "Fear in the coffin will only make this process more grueling." My father swallowed. "I've read 1,000 theories," he said. "Most of them are contradictory." "They are human approximations," Q replied. "Vampirism is not a curse. It is a state." "A transformation?" my father asked. Q nodded. "You will not become something else. You will become what already lies within." My father laughed weakly. He looked down into the coffin. "Will I still be me?" "Yes," Q said without hesitation. "Your memories remain intact, but immortal life changes us all eventually." My father nodded slowly. "And my body?" "Unlocking the true power of the body eradicates weakness." Q said, "Disease is inefficiency. Age is redundant. You will no longer decay." "And the sun?" my father asked quietly. "This is not Hollywood," Q said. My father smiled. "I never liked Hollywood anyway." Q let out a soft chuckle, something I didn't know he could do. "You chase the truth without demanding a reward. That is why immortality is granted to you. The truth is revealed eventually to all who genuinely seek it." My father turned to me. His eyes were shining, not with fear, but relief. Then he stepped into the coffin without another word. 3 days, my friend. Open your mind and allow this castle's energy to awaken you." When the coffin closed, the sound echoed through the chamber. The waiting nearly destroyed me. For 3 days I did not sleep and did not work. Other guides gave tours of the castle, completely unaware of the process going on beneath their feet. On the 3rd night, I returned for my father. As I reached the chamber, Q stood, facing the door as if he knew when I'd arrive. "You wish to see what your father has become?" Q said, pride in his voice. "I do. Please tell me he is alive." I croaked. "For one to become alive, they first must die." With that statement, Q waved his hand and the coffin lid swung open. My father emerged, reborn. Color flooded his skin, his posture straightened, his breathing steady. He touched his chest in disbelief, then laughed loud and wild, the sound of a man reunited with himself. "I feel..." He searched for the word. "Fantastic." Q watched us from a respectful distance, his hands folded behind his back. "You saved my life," my father exclaimed, his voice thick. Q smiled. I felt my throat tighten. "There is no way to repay you," I said. "If there were..." "There is," Q interrupted gently. "Live. Enjoy the gift of life." My father stepped forward and extended his hand. For a moment I wasn't sure Q would take it. Then he did, with elegance. "Thank you," my father said. Q released his hand. He turned then, already walking away, his footsteps echoing toward the spiral stairs. "Come," he said. "Dawn approaches." We followed him through corridors I had walked 1,000 times, though now they felt altered. "You will not see me often, or maybe ever again," he said, "but you are not alone." He placed one hand against the stone wall. "You always have a friend beneath the surface." Then he was gone, swallowed by shadow and silence. The next morning, my father and I went to his hospital appointment. The scans were taken quickly, too quickly, then repeated. The head physician stood staring at the monitor as if it had insulted him. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "What isn't?" my father asked pleasantly. "The tumors," the doctor said. "They've disappeared, just completely gone." He turned, eyes wide. "What treatment did you undergo?" My father met his gaze calmly. "Something unconventional." The doctor exhaled sharply. "We need to involve researchers, people of science." My father smiled, soft and amused. "No need," he said. "They never believed me then. They don't deserve to believe me now." The doctor stared, speechless. My father stood, steady on his feet, and placed a hand on my shoulder. And as we walked out together into the sunlight, I realized something. History never dies. It waits for the right moment to speak again.